We only came because your father paid us to pretend we care. My aunt said that as she lifted my birthday cake, 30 candles still burning, and dropped it in the trash. I was 28, standing in my own dining room, and I was the only person in that room who already knew what she was about to lose. My name is Maya. 4 months before that birthday, I had quietly purchased the building my aunt's entire business runs out of. $1.2 million, my name on the deed. Her name on a lease she hadn't signed yet. I didn't cry when she said it. I reached into my bag, pulled out the new lease, and slid it across the counter without a single word. Her hands started shaking before she finished the first page. There were 9 people in that room. What happened in the next 6 minutes cost my aunt the business she had spent 20 years building. 3 of those 9 haven't spoken to her since. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back 4 months, to the morning I walked into a real estate office and signed my name on a deed my aunt still believed was someone else's. In my family, there is a ledger that never closes. My father, Arthur, believes every relationship has a price tag, and he's been the one holding the checkbook since my mother died when I was 5. He doesn't do hugs, he does bank transfers. He doesn't offer advice, he offers administrative opportunities. I am the one who processes the invoices. I was sitting in his home office on a Tuesday morning, the air smelling of old paper and the expensive lemon polish my father insists the cleaners use twice a week. My desk is a small, functional mahogany slip tucked into the corner of his massive suite. From here, I manage his 12 rental properties, 3 car notes, and the discretionary fund that keeps our extended family from actually having to work for a living. Specifically, I was looking at the utility bill for the Gilded Thread, my Aunt Sylvia's boutique. It was $840 for the month. Sylvia doesn't pay her own electricity. She doesn't pay her own water. And for the last 15 years, she hasn't paid a dime of rent because she operates out of one of my father's legacy buildings. The door to the office swung open without a knock. Sylvia walked in trailing a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and the kind of frantic energy that usually precedes a request for money. "Arthur, the HVAC is rattling again," she said, bypassing me entirely to stand at my father's desk. "I have 3 clients from the valley coming in at noon, and I cannot have the showroom sounding like a machine shop." My father didn't look up from his Wall Street Journal. "Maya, add it to the maintenance list." "I already called the repairman, Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice level. "He'll be there by 10. Sylvia finally turned her head, looking at me like I was a piece of office equipment that had suddenly started speaking. "Make sure he uses the side entrance, Maya. And tell him not to leave his muddy boots on the Carrara marble. I don't have time to clean up after the help." "I'll handle it," I said. My father reached for his gold fountain pen and scribbled a check for $1,000, sliding it toward Sylvia. "Buy yourself lunch after the repair, Sylvia. Just keep the peace. It's what family does." Sylvia tucked the check into her Prada clutch with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She patted my father's hand, then looked back at me. "Be a dear and print out my inventory tax forms for the quarter. I need them by 5. She didn't wait for an answer. She just walked out, the click of her heels on the hardwood sounding like a countdown. That was the family law. Sylvia was the artist, the entrepreneur, the face of the family. I was the girl with the spreadsheets and the sensible shoes who kept the lights on. I was the spinster in training who needed the busy work to feel useful. An hour later, I was driving my 10-year-old Corolla toward the north end of downtown. I wasn't going to the boutique. I was going to the building itself, a 3-story brick structure on the corner of 4th and Main. I met Mr. Henderson in the back alley. He was 70, wearing a faded flannel shirt and carrying a thermos. He'd owned the building for 40 years, and he was the only person in town who knew Sylvia wasn't the landlord. "She's inside complaining about the vents again," he said, nodding toward the back door of the boutique. "I know, my father sent me to check on the repair." Mr. Henderson looked at me for a long beat. He'd watched me do the inspections, file the insurance claims, and argue with contractors for the last 6 years while Sylvia sat in the front window sipping Prosecco. "Your father sent over another lowball offer this morning," he said, leaning against the brick. "Third one this month. He thinks because I'm retiring, I'll take 60 cents on the dollar just to be done with it." "He likes a bargain," I muttered. "I rejected it," Henderson said. He unscrewed the cap of his thermos and poured a cup of coffee. The steam rose between us, smelling of real beans, not the burnt office stuff. "I told him the building was worth one too. He told me I was delusional." He held out a second paper cup. I took it. The warmth seeped into my fingers. "I've been watching you, Maya," Henderson said quietly. "You're the one who knows where the shut-off valves are. You're the one who fixed the roof leak in the middle of a thunderstorm last October while your aunt was in Cabo. You're the one doing the work." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded manila envelope. "I won't sell to your father," he said, "but I'd sell to you. 1.2 million. No haggling, no games. Just a clean exit for me and a future for someone who actually gives a damn about the brick and mortar." I stared at the envelope. My father thought I was a secretary. My aunt thought I was the help. But they forgot one thing. My mother had been the primary earner before she died. She'd left a life insurance policy and a small trust that my father had ignored for 20 years, assuming it was play money I'd eventually spend on a wedding he'd have to pay for. I'd been moving those assets into high-yield tech stocks since I was 21. "I need to see the appraisal," I said. Mr. Henderson smiled and slid the documents across the top of a trash bin. "Already in there, along with the current lease agreements, including the one for the boutique." I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter. I didn't know yet what Sylvia had planned for my birthday, but as I looked at the owner line on the deed, I knew I was done processing her bills. I put the envelope in my bag and walked toward the front of the building. I didn't check the vents. I went straight to the county clerk's office. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my balcony with a cold cup of tea, watching the streetlights flicker on and off, the deed sitting on my lap like a loaded weapon. By 8:00 a.m., I was back in my father's office, my fingers flying over the keyboard, but my mind was 3 miles away at the corner of 4th and Main. I waited for the right moment. It came just after lunch, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My father was sipping a scotch, his noon cap, and looking out at the manicured lawn. "Dad," I said, standing in the doorway, "I want to talk to you about the Henderson building." He didn't turn around. "I told you, Maya, I'm handling it. Henderson is being stubborn, but he'll fold. He needs the liquidity for his Florida condo." "He won't fold," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "He's already rejected your last 3 offers. He wants one too, and he's not budging. I was thinking, I'd like to buy it, not for you, for me, as an investment." The silence that followed was heavy. My father slowly turned his chair. He didn't look angry, he looked amused. That was always his favorite way to diminish me, with a smile that suggested I was a child asking for a real unicorn. "You?" he asked, a small chuckle escaping his throat. "Maya, you're a wonderful assistant. You're organized, you're diligent, and you have a great eye for clerical errors. But commercial real estate, that requires a killer instinct. You don't have the stomach for the negotiations, let alone the overhead. I've been managing your properties for 6 years, Dad. I know the overhead better than anyone. I have the capital. I want to take a loan from the estate." "No," he snapped, the amusement vanishing. "The answer is no. I'm not lending you money to play landlord with a building I've already earmarked for your aunt. That property is going to be Sylvia's 20th anniversary gift. It's a family legacy. You just find a way to let the tenants walk all over you. Before I could respond, the front door chimed. Sylvia floated in, draped in a silk wrap that probably cost more than my first car. She must have caught the tail end of the conversation because she stopped right next to me, leaning against the doorframe. "Buying a building, Maya?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Sweetheart, you can barely handle the stress of scheduling a plumber. Remember when the water main broke at the duplex? You looked like you were going to faint." "I didn't faint, Sylvia. I stayed until 3 in the morning making sure the basement was pumped out while you were at an art gala." Sylvia waved a manicured hand as if dismissing a fly. "Details, details. The point is you're a worker bee. You aren't meant for the hive. You couldn't even run a lemonade stand without checking a manual first. Leave the business to the people who actually know how to sign the front of a check, not just the back." She turned to my father, her eyes sparkling. "Arthur, tell her about the plans for the boutique expansion. I want to knock out the north wall and put in a champagne bar." My father nodded, his expression softening as it always did for her. "We'll get it done, Sylvia. Don't worry about Maya. She's just having a little moment of ambition. It'll pass once she sees the next stack of tax returns I need filed." I felt a hot, sharp prickle behind my eyes, but I didn't let a single tear fall. I walked back to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my private brokerage account, the one my father never bothered to check because he assumed I didn't have the sense to grow anything on my own. I stared at the balance. My mother's legacy, fueled by 7 years of aggressive, disciplined investing. $1,214,302.18. I wasn't a worker bee. I was the person who had been funding the hive while they sat in the sun. I picked up my phone and sent a one-line text to Mr. Henderson. "I'm in. Send the wire instructions." That was the first real crack. I spent the rest of the afternoon processing Sylvia's dry-cleaning bills, my hand steady as a surgeon's. She thought she was getting a gift. My father thought he was winning a war of attrition. Neither of them realized that the ground beneath the boutique had already shifted. I didn't tell them. I didn't argue. I just waited for the notification from my bank. When it finally popped up on my screen, wire transfer confirmed, I felt a rush of cold, clean air in my lungs for the first time in a decade. I looked over at my father, who was laughing at something Sylvia said. "I'll have those tax forms for you by 5, Sylvia," I said quietly. "Good girl," she replied without looking at me. That was the last time I'd ever be a good girl for them. I wasn't just the secretary anymore. I was the landlord. And the first thing I planned to do was audit the rent, or lack thereof. I didn't go home after the wire transfer cleared. I sat in my car in the county clerk's parking lot, watching a flock of pigeons fight over a discarded bagel. My heart was thumping against my ribs, a rhythmic reminder that I had just committed the first act of true rebellion in 28 years. The next morning, the office felt different. The air was still lemon-polished and the clock still ticked, but the spatial hierarchy of the room, the way my desk was tucked away like a shameful secret, no longer felt like a permanent sentence. "Maya," my father called out, not looking up from his tablet. "I need the closing disclosures for the Henderson deal. I'm going to make one more push this afternoon. I've decided to go up by 50,000. It's more than the old man deserves, but Sylvia is already picking out upholstery for her champagne lounge." I didn't move toward the filing cabinet. I stayed seated, my hands resting on my keyboard. "I can't do that, Dad." He paused, his thumb hovering over the screen. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me. I can't process the paperwork for your bid," I said, my voice remarkably flat. It's a conflict of interest. My father let out a short, dry bark of a laugh. A conflict of interest. Maya, you're an administrative assistant. You don't have interests. You have tasks. Now get the file. Mr. Henderson has already accepted a full-price offer, I said. The building is under contract. Any further bids from you would just be a waste of time and postage. The door to the suite burst open. Sylvia was there, as if she had a sensory alarm for whenever her name wasn't being praised. She was holding a swatch of velvet the color of a bruised plum. "What do you mean under contract?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave. "Arthur, you told me that building was as good as mine. I've already told the girls at the boutique we're moving the showroom by Christmas." "Henderson must have found another buyer," my father said, his face reddening. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "Who is it? Some REIT? A local developer? I'll buy them out. Everyone has a number." "I can't disclose the buyer's identity," I said, "but the deal is solid." Sylvia stepped toward my desk, the smell of her perfume suddenly suffocating. She slammed the velvet swatch down onto my keyboard. "You did this. You've been dragging your feet on the paperwork on purpose. You're jealous, aren't you? You're so bitter that I'm successful and you're just... Here, you sabotaged the deal out of spite." "I didn't sabotage anything, Sylvia. Mr. Henderson chose a buyer who valued the property." "Arthur, do something," Sylvia wailed, turning to my father. "She's ruining everything. My 20th anniversary is in 3 months. If I don't have that building, the whole brand is at risk. She's actively trying to destroy my business." My father stood up. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a defective piece of equipment. "If you can't perform your duties, Maya, you don't belong in this office. You've let your petty resentments interfere with family business." He walked over to the corner of the room where the server was kept. Without a word, he pulled the power cord. My monitors went black. "You're done," he said. "Consider yourself on unpaid leave until you decide to be part of this family again. I'm freezing the company card and I'm revoking your access to the property management portal. If you want to play games with the family legacy, you can do it on your own time. Dad, I've worked for you for 6 years for less than market rate, and I've provided you with a roof, a car, and a purpose." He cut me off. "Clearly, I gave you too much of the latter." "You've forgotten who provides for whom." Sylvia smirked, leaning back against the mahogany. "Maybe now you'll have time to find a hobby, Maya, since you're so fond of interests." My father sat back down and pulled his phone out. He didn't look at me as I gathered my purse. "I'm sending you a calendar invite for your birthday dinner," he said, his voice cold. "Consider it your one chance to apologize and get your job back. If you aren't there, and if you aren't grateful, don't bother coming back to this office at all." I walked out of the house with my head high, but as soon as I reached my car, my hands started to shake. I was officially cut off. No salary, no access, no purpose. But as I pulled out of the driveway, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a notification from the county clerk's office. The deed had been processed. I didn't know yet that my father had already authorized Sylvia to start the moving sale for the boutique, but I knew the last time I'd used that front door as a daughter was over. I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't even go to my apartment. I drove until the city lights faded into the bruised purple of the suburbs, eventually pulling into a gravel lot of a 24-hour diner. I sat in the car for an hour, the engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the manila envelope on the passenger seat. The reality of the unpaid leave hit me with the force of a physical blow. My father hadn't just fired me, he had attempted to erase my utility. To him, I was a set of hands that moved paper. Without the paper, he assumed I would dissolve. I checked my banking app. The $2 million was gone, replaced by a deed, but I still had my personal savings, about $4,000 in a checking account he didn't oversee. It wasn't much, but it was enough to breathe for a month. The smallness of my life felt suffocating. I had spent my entire 20s building a fortress for a man who didn't want me in it, and a business for a woman who viewed me as a janitor. I looked at the guest list for my birthday party, which was still synced to my phone calendar. 30 names, not a single one was mine. They were Sylvia's lead designers, my father's golf partners, and the family friends who only called when they needed a discount at the boutique. I was a prop in my own home. I reached out and touched the dashboard, the plastic cold under my fingertips. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I had walked away from the payroll, but the emotional gravity of that house was still trying to pull me back in. My phone buzzed. I expected a vitriolic text from Sylvia or a cold directive from my father. Instead, it was a text from an unsaved number. The keys are under the loose brick by the side door. I left a pot of coffee on the warmer. Welcome home, landlord. It was Mr. Henderson. I drove back to the city to the corner of 4th and Main. The street was quiet, the boutique's front window darkened, the mannequins standing like stiff sentinels in the shadows. I walked down the side alley, my footsteps echoing against the brick. I found the loose stone, felt the cold weight of the antique brass key, and let myself into the back office. The room smelled of cedar and old books. The coffee was still warm, sitting in a small glass carafe. Next to it was a single, small chocolate bar and a yellow sticky note. You're the only one who ever noticed the roof leak. Don't let them tell you that you don't see things clearly. I sat in Mr. Henderson's old leather chair. It creaked under my weight, a sturdy, honest sound. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sitting in a chair that had been assigned to me. I wasn't waiting for a command. I broke off a piece of the chocolate. It was dark and rich. I looked out the small, high window at the brick wall of the neighboring building. It wasn't a beautiful view, but it was mine. I didn't need my father's permission to be in this room. I didn't need Sylvia's approval to breathe this air. I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "Commercial lease agreement." Then, underneath that, I typed the address of the boutique. I didn't know yet that my father had already told the family accountant I was having a breakdown. But as I listened to the quiet hum of the building I now owned, the fear started to turn into something sharper. Something with an edge. The bank had cleared the funds. Tuesday was closing. And Wednesday was the day I'd start charging for the space they thought was free. The lie didn't start with a scream. It started with a whisper that had been curated to sound like a tragedy. By Friday morning, the air in the city felt heavy. I went to a local coffee shop 3 blocks from my father's house, a place where the baristas usually knew my order before I reached the counter. When I walked in, the girl behind the machine, a girl I'd tipped $5 every Monday for 3 years, looked at me and then immediately looked at the floor. She didn't ask if I wanted my usual oat milk latte. She just handed me a black coffee and walked to the other end of the bar. I sat at a small table in the corner and opened my phone. My social media feed was a wall of silence. I had been blocked by 4 of my cousins, all of whom worked part-time for Sylvia at the boutique. My cousin Sarah, who was usually my only ally in the family group chat, hadn't replied to my text about picking up my remaining boxes from the office. Then I saw it. A post from Sylvia. It was a photo of her and my father sitting in his garden, looking somber. The caption read, "Sometimes the hardest part of business is realizing that the people you trust most are the ones struggling the most. We're taking some time as a family to handle a private matter involving Maya's health and some financial discrepancies. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time. Financial discrepancies. Health." She was painting me as a thief and a lunatic in the same breath. She wasn't just defending her position, she was salt-earthing mine so I could never work in this town again. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Gable, the family's longtime accountant. He'd known me since I was a teenager. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with a patronizing pity that made my skin crawl. "I heard about the incident at the office. Your father is very concerned. He's asked me to look over the discretionary accounts to see if we can settle things without involving the authorities. He's even offered to pay for a stay at that wellness retreat in Sedona. You know, the one for burnout and emotional regulation. There are no discrepancies, Mr. Gable. I've never taken a cent that wasn't my salary." "Now, Maya, let's not make this harder. We all know you've been under a lot of pressure. Managing a man like Arthur isn't easy. Why don't you just come in, sign a few release forms, and we can put this manic episode behind us?" I hung up without answering. My hands were shaking so hard I had to tuck them under my thighs. They weren't just taking my job, they were trying to take my reputation, my sanity, and my future. I didn't have time to hide. It was my cousin's baby shower that afternoon, an event I'd spent 3 weekends helping plan before I was fired. I knew if I didn't show up, it would be seen as a confession. I arrived at the country club at 2:00 p.m. The ballroom was filled with the smell of lilies and expensive catering. As I walked through the double doors, the room didn't go silent, it went cold. It was like a physical temperature drop. People who had known me for 2 decades suddenly found the patterns on their salad plates deeply fascinating. My Aunt Linda, who usually hugged me so hard my ribs cracked, suddenly turned her back to show someone her new bracelet. The hostess, a woman named Brenda who Sylvia had been friends with for years, stepped into my path. She didn't smile, she held a clipboard like a shield. "Maya," she said, her voice clipped. "We weren't sure you'd be up for a crowd today. Sylvia said you were resting." "I'm fine, Brenda. I'm here for my cousin." "Right, well." She looked around the room. The main tables were full of family, Sylvia sitting right in the center, holding court. "We've had to rearrange the seating, you're over there." She pointed to the very back of the room, near the swinging doors to the kitchen. It was a single, wobbly folding chair tucked behind a pillar. No place setting, no name card. Just a seat in the shadows where I could watch the family I had served for a decade celebrate a life I was no longer allowed to be a part of. I walked to the chair. I sat down. I watched as Sylvia stood up to give a toast. She looked radiant in a cream-colored suit. She didn't look like a woman who was about to lose her business. She looked like a queen. "And I want to thank Arthur," Sylvia said, raising her glass toward my father, who was seated at the head table, "for his incredible generosity. As many of you know, the Gilded Thread is entering a new chapter. Arthur is finalizing the purchase of our building as we speak. By the time we celebrate Maya's birthday next week, we'll officially be the owners of our own destiny." The room erupted in applause. My father beamed, nodding with the modest pride of a man who had just bought a kingdom. He didn't look at the back of the room. He didn't look at the daughter sitting on a folding chair by the trash bins. But as I sat there, the smell of steak and perfume clashing in the air, I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. A calendar alert, final closing documents recorded. Title, Maya Thorne. I looked at Sylvia, who was laughing as she took a sip of champagne. She thought she was the owner. She thought she had won. I leaned back in my wobbly chair and took a deep breath. The social contagion had spread, but the legal reality was a fever they hadn't caught yet. I didn't go back to my father's house after the baby shower. I couldn't stomach the thought of the lemon polish or the ticking clock. Instead, I drove to a small, independent hardware store on the edge of the district and bought a heavy-duty padlock. I went straight to the corner of 4th and Main. The brass key Mr. Henderson gave me feeling like a hot coal in my pocket. By the time I parked in the alley, the sun was dipping below the skyline, casting long, jagged shadows across the brickwork. I walked to the back door, the one Sylvia used for her high-end deliveries. I knelt by the threshold, my fingers tracing the rough texture of the mortar. I wasn't there to break in. I was there to claim. The side door to the upstairs office opened with a soft groan. Mr. Henderson was standing there, silhouetted against a single desk lamp. He didn't look like a man who had just walked away from $1 million asset. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy suitcase. "I saw the posts, Maya," he said, stepping back to let me in. "Your aunt is quite the storyteller. She's already telling the neighbors that I'm holding the building for her until the paperwork clears." "She's telling people I'm sick," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "She told the whole country club I'm having a manic episode." Mr. Henderson didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He walked to his desk, picked up a thick, weathered accordion file and set it on the table between us. "People like your aunt rely on the fact that most people don't read the fine print," he said. "They thrive in the gray areas. But I've spent 40 years in this building and I've kept every scrap of paper. You aren't just the owner, Maya. You're the person who holds the truth." He opened the file. Inside were decades of history, maintenance logs, property tax receipts, and the original lease Sylvia had signed 20 years ago. "Look at this," Henderson said, sliding a specific document toward me. "This is the lease renewal from 5 years ago. Your father handled it, but he made a mistake. He was so busy trying to save Sylvia money that he forgot to include a right of first refusal clause for the tenant. And more importantly, the lease officially expired 6 months ago. She's been operating on a month-to-month basis ever since." He tapped a highlighted section at the bottom of the page. "And here is the kicker. Clause 14B, in the event of a change in ownership, the new landlord has the right to adjust the rent to fair market value with 30 days' notice. Or if the tenant is month-to-month, the landlord can terminate the occupancy immediately for any breach of building code." "The HVAC," I whispered. "The HVAC," Henderson nodded. "Very thing she's been screaming at you to fix. It's a violation. It hasn't been serviced to code in 3 years because your father didn't want to pay the industrial rate. Technically, that boutique is a fire hazard." He reached into the file again and pulled out a smaller envelope. "I also have this. It's a log of every time Sylvia borrowed the building's common area electricity for her private showroom events. It totals about $12,000 in unpaid utilities over the last 4 years." He looked me in the eye. "You have backup now, Maya, but a document is just paper until you use it. You aren't the girl in the corner office anymore. You're the woman who owns the walls she's standing in." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His skin was rough, smelling of sawdust and coffee. "I don't have a daughter," he said quietly. "But if I did, I'd want her to have your spine. Don't let them bend it." I took the file. The weight of it was grounding. I wasn't just reacting to their cruelty anymore, I was building a case. "Your father called me an hour ago," Henderson added as I turned to leave. "He offered me $1.4 million to tear up your contract. He told me you were unwell and didn't understand what you were signing." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I don't deal with assistants," Henderson smiled. "I told him he'd have to talk to the owner." I walked back to my car, the file tucked under my arm. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sylvia. "Just dropped off your birthday cake at your place. 30 candles, Maya. Time to grow up and stop this temper tantrum. See you at 6. I didn't reply. I drove to a 24-hour copy center. I didn't need a birthday wish. I needed 3 copies of the new lease, a formal notice of rent increase, and a copy of the building code violation report. I spent the next 4 hours drafting the most expensive birthday present Sylvia had ever received. My name was at the top of every page, bold, black, and permanent. I didn't go to the county recorder's office. I went to a small law firm on the edge of the historic district, the kind of place with creaky floorboards and a receptionist who has worked there since the 70s. I needed a specialist in commercial evictions, someone who didn't play golf with my father. By 9:00 a.m. on Monday, I was sitting across from a woman named Mrs. Gable, no relation to the family accountant. She wore a sharp charcoal suit and looked at the world through glasses that seemed to zoom in on the smallest grammatical errors. "The deed is recorded," I said, sliding the fresh paperwork across her desk. "I am the sole owner of 412 Main. The primary tenant is my aunt's boutique. There is no signed lease currently in effect." Mrs. Gable didn't smile. She pulled a magnifying glass from her drawer and began to read. The only sound in the room was the hum of a space heater and the distant, muffled roar of traffic. "Month to month," she murmured, her finger tracing a line on the expired lease Henderson had given me. "And you say the HVAC system is non-compliant." "I have the inspection report from Saturday," I said, handing over a second envelope. "The units are 20 years old. The drainage lines are backing up into the shared crawl space. It's a mold hazard and a fire risk." Mrs. Gable looked up. For the first time, I saw a glint of something like respect in her eyes. "Your father was very sloppy, Maya. He was so busy subsidizing your aunt's lifestyle that he neglected the legal infrastructure of the asset. He treated this building like a piggy bank, not a liability." "I want to offer her a new lease," I said. "Fair market value, plus a retroactive utility fee for the common area power she's been poaching. If she refuses to sign, I want her out. Fair market value for that corner is 3 times what she's been pretending to pay," Mrs. Gable noted. "And with the violation on record, the city could pull her occupancy permit anyway. You have total leverage here. This isn't a negotiation, it's a notification." She tapped her pen against the mahogany. "But you should know, once I send this, there's no going back. The family dynamic you've known for 28 years will be incinerated. Your father will see this as a declaration of war." "The war started when they dropped my birthday cake in the trash," I said. "I'm just the one finally showing up with the bill." "Very well." Mrs. Gable pulled a fresh sheet of letterhead. "I'll draft the notice of new ownership and demand for lease execution. It will be delivered to the boutique by courier at noon tomorrow." I left her office and drove to the bank. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look at the texts from my cousins asking if I was coming to my senses. I went to the safety deposit box where I kept my mother's old jewelry, the few pieces my father hadn't sold or lent to Sylvia for galas. I sat in the small, private viewing booth and opened the box. Inside was a simple gold locket and a pair of pearl earrings. I put the locket on. It felt heavy and cool against my skin. That was the moment the leverage became real to me. It wasn't just about the building anymore. It was about the fact that I finally owned something they couldn't touch, couldn't sell, and couldn't diminish with a laugh. I spent the rest of the afternoon at a local print shop, making 10 copies of the building's new rules of conduct. No more private parties in the common area. No more family discounts on the water bill. No more entering the building through the side door without a key card. I wasn't a secretary. I was a strategist. And the clock on Sylvia's 20-year free ride was officially in its final hours. I didn't go to the office on Tuesday morning. I didn't even go to the bakery. I stayed in my apartment, watching the dust motes dance in the light of the window, waiting for the notification from the courier. By noon, my phone began to vibrate. It didn't stop for 20 minutes. I didn't answer. I knew exactly what was happening. A 3-page legal document had just been handed to the shop manager at the Gilded Thread. It was addressed to Sylvia Thorne. It didn't have my father's company logo at the top. It had the crest of a law firm that specialized in contractual integrity. The first text from Sylvia was a single word: Explain. The second was a photo of the document's signature line, where my name was printed clearly as the managing member of Thorn Holdings, LLC. Is this some kind of sick joke? You're pretending to own the building. I'm calling your father. I watched the typing bubbles appear and disappear on the screen. She was spiraling. For 20 years, her business had been a house of cards built on my father's bank account. Now she was staring at a demand for a $12,000 utility reimbursement and a new lease that would triple her overhead. My father called 3 times in a row. I let it go to voicemail. By 4:00 p.m., I finally listened to his message. His voice was no longer amused or patronizing. It was vibrating with a low, dangerous frequency. Maya, I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling with this Henderson man, but you will withdraw those papers immediately. I am the executor of the family estate. You do not have the authority to harass your aunt. If you don't call me back in the next 10 minutes, I am calling the bank to report your trust fund as compromised. I will have you declared incompetent, Maya. Don't test me. He still thought he could reach into my life and flip a switch to turn me off. He didn't realize that the $2 million was already gone. It had been converted into 3 stories of brick, mortar, and steel. You can't freeze a building. I spent the evening setting the dining room table in my apartment. My birthday party was tomorrow. My father hadn't canceled it. In his mind, the party was the arena where he would force my surrender. He assumed I would show up, apologize for the clerical error, and hand over the deed in exchange for my job back. I placed a manila envelope under my own placemat. Inside wasn't just the lease. It was the eviction notice Mrs. Gable had prepared as a fallback. Through the window, I saw a black SUV pull into the guest parking spot. It was my cousin Sarah. She didn't text me. She just walked up to the door and knocked, a soft, hesitant rhythm. I opened the door. Sarah was holding a small box of cupcakes. Her eyes were red. Maya, she whispered, I saw the papers. I was at the shop when the courier came. Sylvia, she's telling everyone you forged the deed. She's telling Dad to have you committed. Do you believe her, Sarah? Sarah looked down at the cupcakes. I saw the utility bills you found, Maya. I'm the one who's been doing the books for the boutique for 3 years. I knew the numbers didn't add up. I knew she was stealing from the building fund, but I was too scared to say anything. If I did, Dad would stop paying my tuition. She looked up, a single tear tracking through her makeup. She's planning to humiliate you tomorrow night. She bought a cake that says 30 just to mock you for being behind in life. She told me to make sure I recorded your reaction when Dad sets you straight. Thank you for telling me, Sarah. Are you going to be there? I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. I closed the door and turned back to the quiet room. The countdown was in its final hours. My father had the money, and Sylvia had the audience, but I had the keys. And tomorrow night, I was going to change the locks. The sun went down on my 28th birthday with a cold, clinical precision. I didn't decorate. I didn't hang streamers or put out party favors. I simply set the table for 9. My father, Aunt Sylvia, 5 cousins, and the 2 family friends Sylvia used as her personal cheer squad. At 6:00 p.m. sharp, the front door chime echoed through the house. I stood in the kitchen, smoothing the front of my black dress. It was professional, sharp, and felt more like armor than party attire. They walked in like they owned the air. My father was in the lead, smelling of expensive tobacco, followed by Sylvia, who was wearing a sprawling floral shawl that made her look twice her size. My cousins trailed behind, their eyes darting to me and then away, like I was a car wreck they had been told not to look at. Happy birthday, Maya, my father said. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the sideboard and poured himself a scotch. I hope you've spent the day reflecting on how lucky you are that we're even here. Sylvia didn't say hello. She marched to the dining table and slammed a white cardboard box onto the mahogany surface. I brought the cake, since you were too preoccupied to handle the arrangements. She flipped the lid open. It was a cheap grocery store sheet cake. In neon pink frosting, someone had piped the number 30. "I'm 28, Sylvia," I said quietly. "Oh, please," she laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. "With the way you've been acting lately, you might as well be 90. You've aged 10 years just trying to spite this family." We sat down. The spatial hierarchy was exactly as it always was. My father at the head, Sylvia to his right, the cousins grouped together, and me, the guest of honor, relegated to the far end, near the door to the kitchen. The folding chair from the baby shower had been replaced by one of my own dining chairs, but the feeling was the same. I was there to be spoken at, not with. The first 15 minutes were a coordinated assault of casual cruelty. They talked about the boutique expansion. They talked about the unfortunate state of my mental health. They talked about the Henderson building as if it were a done deal, a prize my father was simply waiting to hand over. "I've already hired the contractors for the north wall," Sylvia said, gesturing with a forkful of salad. "Arthur, we should have the grand reopening by November. Of course, we'll need someone to handle the permits. Maya, if you can stay focused for more than 10 minutes, maybe your father will let you file the paperwork." My father nodded, his eyes fixed on me. "That's the deal, Maya. You apologize to Sylvia for that ridiculous legal stunt yesterday, you hand over the deed Henderson tricked you into signing, and we go back to the way things were. I'll even forget about the audit." I took a slow sip of water. "I didn't forge anything, Dad, and Henderson didn't trick me. I paid full market value with my own capital." Sylvia snorted, dropping her fork so it clattered against the china. "Your own capital? You mean the money your father gave you for managing his properties? That's family money, Maya. It belongs to us. You're just the bookkeeper who got greedy." She stood up, her face flushing a deep, angry red. She walked over to the sideboard, picked up the cake, and brought it to the center of the table. "We only came because your father paid us to pretend we care," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "He had to buy the cousins dinner just to get them to sit in the same room as a thief. This whole night is a bribe, Maya. We don't want to be here. We want the building." She looked at the cake, then at me. With a slow, deliberate movement, she turned toward the trash can at the end of the counter. She tilted the box. The cake slid out, hitting the bottom of the plastic bin with a dull, heavy thud. The pink 30 smeared against the trash bag. "There," Sylvia said, dusting her hands. "Now that the theater is over, let's get down to business. Give him the papers." The room went silent. My cousins looked at their laps. My father leaned back, waiting for my collapse. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I reached into my bag, which was hanging on the back of my chair, and pulled out the manila envelope. I stood up and walked the length of the table, sliding the document across the wood until it stopped right in front of Sylvia. "This isn't an apology," I said. Sylvia smirked, her hands shaking slightly as she opened the flap. "Oh, playing hardball until the end? Very well." She pulled out the first page. Her eyes scanned the text. The smirk didn't just fade, it evaporated. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's a new commercial lease," I said, my voice projecting to every corner of the room. "The previous one expired 6 months ago. Since you are currently a month-to-month tenant with no valid contract, I am exercising my right as the owner of 412 Main to set the new terms." "Owner?" my cousin Sarah's brother asked, leaning forward. "Wait, Maya actually bought it." "She's lying," Sylvia shouted, her voice cracking. "Arthur, she's lying, look at this." My father snatched the paper. His face went from pale to a dark, bruised purple as he read. 1.2 million. "Where did you get that kind of money?" "From the trust Mom left me. The one you told me was play money. I've been investing it for 7 years, Dad. I didn't need your permission to grow it." I looked at Sylvia. The new rent is $12,000 a month. That's fair market value for the square footage. Additionally, there is a $12,000 surcharge for the common area utilities you've been diverting for the last 4 years. I have the logs from Mr. Henderson. I can't pay that. Sylvia screamed. That's more than my monthly profit. Arthur, tell her she can't do this. My father stood up, slamming his fist on the table so hard the wine glasses jumped. Listen to me, you ungrateful girl. I am your father. I will have this deed overturned in court before the sun comes up tomorrow. You can't just walk in here and destroy a 20-year business because you're having a tantrum. I'm not destroying it, Dad, I said. The building code is. The HVAC system is a fire hazard. The city inspector is coming on Monday. If the repairs aren't made, repairs Sylvia refused to pay for, the occupancy permit will be revoked. The building is legally uninhabitable. You called the city on your own family. Sylvia's voice was a ragged whisper. I called the city on a landlord's liability, I corrected. Which is me, I'm protecting my investment. The room felt like it was shrinking. Sylvia turned to the cousins, her eyes wild. Don't listen to her, she's trying to scare you. We're a family, we stick together. Cousin Sarah stood up. She wasn't looking at Sylvia, she was looking at the lease on the table. $12,000 in unpaid utilities, she asked. Sylvia, you told me the building covered those. You told me that's why we couldn't afford to give the staff raises last year. You said the landlord was squeezing us. I was protecting the business, Sarah. No, Sarah said, her voice trembling but clear. You were stealing from the building to pay for your silk wraps and your trips to Cabo, and you let us blame Maya for it. Sarah grabbed her coat from the back of her chair. She looked at me, a small, sad nod of recognition passing between us. I always knew you were the only one doing the work, Maya. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. Sarah walked out the front door. The sound of it closing was like a gavel striking. Sylvia turned back to my father, her hands clawing at his sleeve. Arthur, do something. Fix it. My father looked at the deed. He looked at the lease. Then he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't condescension. It was fear. He realized his checkbook had no power over a deed recorded in my name. He realized he couldn't buy this problem away because I wasn't for sale. The lease needs to be signed by midnight on Sunday, I said, picking up my purse. If it isn't, the eviction notice on the final page becomes active on Monday morning. You'll have 48 hours to vacate the showroom. You wouldn't, my father said, his voice hollow. I already have, I replied. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the trash bag containing the neon pink cake and walked toward the front door. As I passed Sylvia, she lunged for my arm, but she tripped on her floral shawl, stumbling against the table. I didn't stop. I walked out into the cool night air, tossed the bag into the bin at the curb, and got into my car. I looked back at the house. Through the window, I could see my father sitting alone at the head of the table, staring at a piece of paper that proved his daughter was no longer his assistant. The birthday party was over. My life was just beginning. The weeks that followed were quiet, not the heavy, stifling silence of my father's office, but the clean, open quiet of a room after the windows have been scrubbed. The fallout was practical and swift. Sylvia didn't sign the lease. She couldn't. Sarah had been right. The boutique had been a hollow shell for years, propped up by my father's subsidies and the stolen utilities. When the real cost of doing business was finally put on paper, the math simply stopped working. 30 days later, the movers arrived. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, a thermos of coffee in my hands, as they hauled out the velvet sofas, the Carrara marble pedestals, and the mannequins. Sylvia wasn't there. She couldn't bear to watch her legacy being loaded into the back of a generic white truck. My father had tried to sue to stop the eviction, but even his high-priced lawyers couldn't argue with a month-to-month tenancy and a documented fire hazard. He lost the first hearing in 20 minutes. He hasn't called me since. The family group chat is gone. The invitations to Sunday brunch have dried up. My social world has shrunk to a fraction of its former size, but for the first time, every person in it knows exactly who I am. Aunt Sylvia's boutique is now a memory. Her name has been scrubbed from the windows. I heard through a cousin that she's living in a small condo my father bought for her in another town, telling anyone who will listen that she was robbed by a daughter who didn't know her place. But the neighborhood knows better. They saw the under new management sign go up. They saw the repairs being made. I didn't sell the building to a developer. I leased the corner space to a local bakery, the same one where the baristas used to look away from me. Now, the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls drifts up to my office every morning. It was a Sunday morning when I walked in for a pastry. Sarah was behind the counter. She'd quit working for my father the day after the party and took a job managing the bakery's front of house. "The usual, Maya?" she asked, smiling. "Please," I said. She handed me a small box. Inside was a single, perfect croissant and a small cupcake with a single white candle. No neon frosting, no wrong numbers. "Happy birthday for real this time," she said softly. We sat by the window for a few minutes, watching the city wake up. We didn't talk about my father or the boutique. We talked about her tuition, about the new roof I'd just approved for the building, and about the fact that the HVAC no longer rattled. It was a real conversation, unpolished, honest. I walked back to my office upstairs, the one that used to belong to Mr. Henderson. I sat in the leather chair that still creaked in all the right places. I opened my coffee and set it on the desk. Beside the cup, I placed the antique brass key. It didn't look like a weapon anymore. It just looked like a tool. Through the window, I watched as a worker on a ladder finished scraping the last ghost of the gold leaf letters, the gilded thread, off the glass downstairs. The sun hit the brick, warming the room, and I took a bite of the pastry Sarah had given me. It was buttery, sweet, and entirely mine. If your family handed you a bill for their love, would you keep paying it, or would you buy the building and evict them?